Hi, everybody. I'm Jimmy DeYoung with another edition of Prophecy Today Intelligence Briefing. This time, the headline, Israel at 73, a fulfillment of Bible prophecy. We have two of our broadcast partners who are going to join me as we think about the 73rd anniversary of the State of Israel becoming a nation among all the nations of the world back in 1948. One is a journalist, David Dolan. He's been a journalist in the Middle East for over 30 years. He knows the Middle East, and he's going to come to the table in just a moment. And then Winkie Medad, an Israeli historian, will tell us the connection between Holocaust and Independence Day. But first, let me talk to you about a documentary that I have available. This is entitled Signs of the Times. This is a documentary that will deal with four major trends in the book of Ezekiel. I'll be discussing them with you in just a moment here on Prophecy Today Intelligence Briefing. But let me tell you those trends. Aliyah, the Jewish people making their way back into the land. Alignment, the nations in the Middle East, Islamic nations led by Russia, to attack the Jewish state. And then there's anticipation of peace. The book of Ezekiel, chapter 38, verses 8 and 11, talk about the Jews living in the land safely in this piece of real estate. And finally, the arrangements for a temple. Now, Ezekiel is talking about the Messiah's temple, but there is another temple that will be up in the city of Jerusalem during the time of the tribulation period, that 7-year period of time. Go to my prophecy bookstore. It's on my website, prophecytoday.com. Go there and you can make your purchase of Signs of the Times, the four major trends in Bible prophecy that deal with the end times. Right now, though, I want to go to our first broadcast partner, David Dolan. He's going to give us tangible evidence that Israel is a fulfillment of Bible prophecy. And of course, the Independence Day marking a absolute tangible evidence that Bible prophecy is in the process of being fulfilled. Would you agree?
Absolutely, Jimmy, and I never really thought I would still be around to see Israel's 73rd birthday. It was her 33rd birthday in 1980 when I moved to Israel for the first, for a year, and ended up living there for 33 years, actually, and I still keep very closely connected to it. And such a unique situation because Memorial Day for the fallen soldiers is the day before Independence Day, and Wednesday evening at sunset, that will end, and all the somber ceremonies that mark Israel's many wars and terror attacks give way to great celebration of the fact that there is a state of Israel and is thriving and economically doing well. Of course, COVID was a big hit, but it was for everyone around the world, so not just Israel. But they're recovering from that and looking forward to more progress on that front this year and getting back to life as much as possible normally.
Winkie Medad, an Israeli historian, will speak to the issue that 1 week after Holocaust Remembrance Day comes Independence Day. There's a unique connection there. You'll see it in just a moment as Winkie comes to the broadcast table. Well, Winkie, 1 week after Holocaust Remembrance Day, April 14 and 15, Independence Day, the celebration of the 73rd birthday of the Jewish state of Israel. That's another very special day to Jewish people, isn't it?
Yes, of course. It is, in fact, the opposite end of the pole, if I could use it that way, of Holocaust Day. We are free. We are liberated. We're able to have an army, a government, a judiciary, economic and social welfare programs all by ourselves. We do not depend on anybody except the favor and the support we gain for what we made ourselves from other nations around the world who support us. And that's the way it should be, a family of nations, one nation earning the respect for what we were able to do. And so therefore, 1 week after Holocaust Day, we enter into Independence Day with joy, with celebration. Although, of course, the day before, once again, we remember the fallen in the wars, pre-state and during the state's existence, because these sacrifices allowed us to be happy and to celebrate on Israel's Independence Day.
Winkie, this morning I was reading in my quiet time Isaiah chapter 42 and verse 6, where it says that Israel will be a light unto the nations. And indeed, Independence Day marking, I do believe, at least partial fulfillment of what God promised the Jewish people, a land where all the Jews could come and live and a kingdom in the future. Boy, fulfillment of prophecy, nothing better than tangible evidence, and that's what Independence Day is. Do you not believe that?
I do believe that, and if I may be proud of Israel this past year, our performance during the COVID-19 crisis and our ability to overcome to a great extent this pandemic and to show the nations of the world a proper way out of it, even though we're still waiting for a 100%, I think is admirable and is biblical in its proportions of mankind confronting a global crisis with belief in ourselves that, of course, comes from the Bible and its prophecies about what Israel is to be to the nations of the world.
Winkie Medad, a Israeli historian that talked about the connection between the Holocaust and the Independence Day. You know, it's unique. When I give a tour in Israel, we go to the Holocaust Museum, and I make this statement. World War I established a land for a people. World War II, the Lord used to establish a people for that land. And that's what God's Word said would happen in the end times. If you'll take your Bible and go with me over to the book of Ezekiel, chapter 37, you may remember the valley of dry bones and that prophecy surrounding that valley of dry bones when God took Ezekiel to it and told him to preach to these dry bones. I've been places where I thought I was preaching to a valley of dry bones, but that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about the truth of a valley that had dry bones all over it, and Ezekiel the prophet was told to preach to these dry bones. Here in verse 7, as he preaches to the bones start to come together. In verse 8, the skin comes out of the sky and covers these bones that had connected. And then verses 9 and 10, the Lord tells Ezekiel to preach to the wind, and the wind filled these flesh-covered bones. They became a mighty army. And by the way, verse 11 gives us the interpretation of this symbolic prophecy. See, the bones coming together would be the regathering of someone, and then the flesh on the bones, the restoration of something. And finally, the wind filling these flesh-covered bones would be reality of it coming back to life. If verse 11 is correct, these bones are the whole house of Israel. The regathering as the bones come together would be the regathering of the Jewish people from all over the world. The book of Ezekiel, chapter 34, talks about the fact that the Lord 18 times will make the statement, I will. I will find my people wherever they have been scattered. I will regather them. I will bring them into the land of their forefathers, and I will feed them like a good shepherd feeds his flock in the land. So Ezekiel 37 talks about a regathering of the Jewish people with the flesh on those bones. That's the restoration of a Jewish state 73 years ago. And the breath of life being breathed into them is the re-energizing of a people that would stand up as a mighty army. Well, those prophecies in Ezekiel 37 and Ezekiel 34 are in the process, or much of those prophecies have been fulfilled. But let me tell you, there's some other prophecies between chapter 37 and chapter 48 of the book of Ezekiel, and I just mentioned these because this would be further evidence that we're living in the days that the Lord was talking about. Ezekiel chapter 35 is talking about the Palestinian people. Verses 5 and 10 talk about the Jews will be killed by the Palestinian people, and then the Palestinians will steal the land of the Jewish people. Chapter 36 of the book of Ezekiel talks about the land itself, and in fact the prophet Ezekiel was told to preach to the land, and that land that they would come into in the last days would be greater than the land that the Lord had given to the Jewish forefathers. Chapter 38 is talking about an alignment of nations that will destroy or endeavor to destroy the Jewish state of Israel. Verse 2 of chapter 38 mentions Magog, that's modern-day Russia. And then Ezekiel 38, Psalm 83, Daniel chapter 11 mentions all the other Islamic states that will be under the leadership of the Russian Empire, who will try to destroy the Jewish state of Israel. By the way, let me just mention in verses 8 and 11 of chapter 38, it talks about the time of peace when the Jews will be living safely in the land. In fact, in verse 11 it says, in unwalled villages. That means they will lay down all of their weapons. You see, Ezekiel did not know about F-35s or F-16s. He didn't know about the Mark V tank. He did not even know about the Apache attack helicopter. But he knew that the Jewish people would protect themselves with a wall around the city. So that's why it states that they will live in unwalled villages. That's anticipation for peace, and we see that happening in the Middle East today. And then chapters 40 to 46, detailed information about Messiah's temple. That's the temple that Jesus will build when he comes back at the end of the 7-year tribulation period. However, there is going to be another temple before that one appears in the city of Jerusalem. Daniel chapter 9, verse 27 talks about in the midst of that 7-year period of time, the tribulation period, there will be a temple on the Temple Mount that the Antichrist will walk into. 2 Thessalonians chapter 2 and verse 4, go into the Holy of Holies and claim to be God. That is the abomination of desolation. I mentioned that we are celebrating the 73rd anniversary, the birthday of the Jewish state of Israel, the modern-day state of Israel. I mentioned these other passages about the Palestinian people, the land itself, the alignment of nations that will try to destroy the Jewish people, the anticipation for peace, and the arrangements for the temple. This is additional information about the Jewish people being a state among all the nations of the world. Tangible evidence that we are living in the days, the last days, that God said would be on the earth when he sends Jesus Christ to take all of us that are Christians out of this world into the heavenlies. That's called the rapture of the church. And all the evidence I've given you from the scriptures today would help us to understand that rapture can actually happen at any moment. And having said that, not a whole lot left for me to say, except let's keep looking up until that does happen. And that is my prophetic perspective on the news today. I'm Jimmy DeYoung. Thank you so very much for joining us on this edition of Prophecy Today Intelligence Briefing. Be sure to come back again next time when we will continue to look at current events in light of biblical prophecy.